Thank you very much, Gianmarco, for a very kind introduction. And also, thank you very much for introducing our paper on the image-based representation of the solid-state structures. Incidentally, I designed my talk such that I will not just focus on image-based representation and its application to generative model, but also general overview of research along the use of machine learning for materials research that's going in my group.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
If that's okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Perfect.
So yeah, so thank you very much again. It's a great pleasure for me to.
Maybe you can put your screen in full screen mode because we see the slide on the side.
Okay, yes, I can do that. So let me see.
It's probably the arrow there, yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
So yeah, so it's a great pleasure for me to be part of this FAIR-DI workshop, and as we all know, in materials informatics, basically, what we want to do is to understand the structure property relationships of the materials based on the data, and then we really want to predict the property of the materials given the structure, and that's the forward prediction, and also as Gianmarco mentioned. You can also go the other way around. In other words, we define the property first, and then property that you want to achieve, and I try to come up with a structure that would have such a property, and that would be an inverse design. And so by doing this kind of mapping forward or inverse, you basically want to dramatically reduce the time and cost for the novel discovery. There are several ingredients that are needed to do the materials informatics. By the way, do you see the old title, or do you see
perfect.
this?
We see everything.
Okay, great. So there are several key ingredients to do materials informatics, and of course, this is data-driven approach. You need the data, and you need the representation for the materials. And once you have the data and representation, then you can perform a simple regression to make a model that would allow us to do the property predictions. And once you have such a tool to make a property prediction, the next important task, perhaps much more challenging task, is to explore the chemical space to pinpoint the material or molecule that would have such a target property. And this is very difficult because the chemical space is essentially almost infinite in practice. And so it's almost like finding a needle in a haystack. And the third aspect is that we more or less all know that many of those materials that are computationally designed, if not most, are discarded in the laboratory because they are not synthesized. And so it'd be good to have a model that would allow us to predict the synthesizability of those materials ahead of the experiments. So today I'm going to talk about some of the works that have been going on in my group along the lines of these three different subjects. So there'll be a short intro of my talk, and I'll start with the property prediction. And so, like I said, once you have the data and representation, then you can perform simple regressions and make a property prediction model. And so far, these kind of prediction models are mainly based on feature engineering. In other words, you basically come up with features that would represent the physics of the property that you are interested in. And for example, for catalysis applications, where you, for example, want to predict the binding energy of CO on top of various metal surfaces, and you can use some kind of mean field descriptors like electronegativity, right, even the width, and then it can sort of predict the binding energy using these kinds of mean field descriptors. But these kinds of feature-derived descriptors are promising, but they could be cumbersome, because if you want to predict a different property, then you need to come up with a different set of descriptors. And also, these kinds of features are heavily dependent on the expert knowledge that could differ from person to person. And so it'd be good to have descriptors that could be generally applicable regardless of different properties. And so to do that, people are trying to use a structural encoding. And this is similar to situations in electronic structure calculations where you basically use Hamiltonian of the system no matter what property that you're calculating. And so because regardless of properties, you basically use the coordinates of atoms and identities of atoms, and that's all. And so you can sort of expect similar things in machine learning if you do some kind of structural encoding. And there are a number of different ways of encoding the structures of the molecules and crystals. And one of the more promising approaches is to represent the molecules and materials using graphs. In graphs, representations basically represent the atoms as nodes and chemical bonds as edges. And by sort of a mathematical operation called convolutions, you can incorporate the information of the remote atoms locally. And by performing several such convolutions, you can basically encode the information of the entire molecule. And these graph methods have been shown to yield promising performance for different properties for molecules and crystals. And for catalysis application, again, Ulysses group showed that they obtained about 0.13 electron volt better for the prediction of CO and H binding energies on different metal surfaces. So it was good, except that in order to use graph, when you make a prediction, you basically need the structure of the material. And so in practice, in order to use this kind of graph model, you basically need to perform DFT geometry relaxations ahead of time. And of course, if you have already done the DFT relaxations, there's no need to use a machine learning model. So the motivation of us working on this field was that it'd be good to have a model that could predict the binding energies without geometry relaxations. And so to do that, to that end, we basically removed the adsorbates on top of the surfaces and label the active site atoms in a pseudoatom, in a fake atom. And instead of encoding the adsorbate bound structures, which needs to be optimized, we basically just encode these slab geometries with the active sites labeled in different fake atoms. And so by doing that, you can actually remove the geometry relaxations when you have the adsorbate bound. And also, even these slab geometries can be obtained from the bulk optimized structures from, for example, Materials project databases. And then you can completely remove all DFT relaxations associated with the prediction of binding energies. And so we benchmarked our method against a couple of methods in literature, and we obtained the accuracy pretty comparable, or sometimes slightly better, sometimes slightly worse than these existing methods. But the key difference is that our methods does not require the geometry relaxations, either surfaces or adsorbate bound surfaces. And so without that, this could be used as a practical way of representing the catalyst surfaces for binding energy applications. And in fact, we sort of the motivation of us working on this subject was to study this kind of system. This is a jagged platinum nanowires, and this has been synthesized by the Yousung group in UCLA. And they started with the nickel platinum straight binary nanowire, and then they somehow de-alloy the nickel atoms, and then they are left with only platinum atoms. And along the way of de-alloying process, this structure of the nanowire becomes very rough and jagged, ups and downs. And they show that this jagged platinum nanowire exhibited very high specific activities for hydrogen evolution reactions and oxygen reduction reactions. We all know, or some of us know, that even for the same platinum, depending on different surfaces, 110, 100, or 111, because they have different coordination numbers, they have very different activities. And having said that, you can easily imagine that this kind of very much amorphous platinum nanowires would have all sorts of coordination environments. And so in order to understand the experiments, you cannot use a couple of ideal surfaces. And instead, you need to be able to evaluate every single active site of this entire jagged platinum nanowires, and then take some kind of ensemble averages. And so to do that, one cannot simply do the geometry optimization for every single site, and that's where we needed this kind of method, which allows us to predict the binding energies without geometry relaxations. And so we did that, and then we did some kind of multi-scale microkinetic modeling, and then from that we obtained current densities as a function of the potential for the hydrogen evolution reactions, and the circles are the simulation results using our method, and this solid lines is an experiment, and they have a pretty good agreement. And the other experimental parameters are also well reproduced. And so by establishing this agreement between theory and experiments, we were able to understand why this jagged platinum nanowire showed such an enhanced activity. Hydrogen evolution reaction usually consists of two steps. First step is the adsorption of hydrogen from water onto the platinum surface, and the second hydrogen comes in. And then these two hydrogens are coupled and to produce hydrogen molecules. And the first step is called Varmer, and the second step is called TAFO. And we find that some of these active sites are very good at hydrogen adsorption, and some of sites are very good at hydrogen coupling. And because the diffusion along the platinum surface is very fast, we find that hydrogen is basically gets adsorbed on the Varmer favorable site and diffuses through to TAFO favorable site and get coupled to evolve hydrogen molecules. And so it's basically a bifunctional mechanism, but it differs from the conventional bifunctional mechanism in the sense that in conventional cases, you basically have two different materials, one material doing one good thing and another material doing another thing good. And by combining the two, you get the synergy. But in our case, it's completely just a monometallic material consisting of a simple platinum atoms, but it exhibits bifunctional mechanism due to the morphology. So we call it autobifunctional mechanism, and to our knowledge, this is the first observation of such phenomena. And I want to emphasize that this understanding was entirely possible because of the development of this pseudo-atom site labeling method that does not require geometry relaxations. Okay, so I'm gonna switch it and then to a second subject of doing the inverse design. So like I said, once you have this kind of sort of property prediction models, the next important task is to explore the chemical space. And in this review article, we categorized the strategies for inverse design into three different categories: high-throughput virtual screening, global optimization, and generative models. In high-throughput virtual screening, as the name implies, you basically take the database and evaluate the property of each candidate one by one until you find the target material. But of course, if the target material is not in the database, then there's no chance that you'll find the target material. In global optimization, for example, in the evolutionary algorithm, you basically start with some reasonable guess, and then you do some kind of, you evaluate the property of the candidate and do some kind of mutations or crossovers, and you basically balance between exploitation and explorations. And then you try to optimize, you try to find the optimal sort of point. And along the way, you basically utilize the information of the prior visit. And so you can say that global optimization may be more efficient than high-throughput virtual screening. And the third category is the generative model, which I will focus on today. And this is the most data-intensive approach. And in generative model, what we are basically trying to do is to take the database, and you take the entire database, you basically try to learn the distribution of data in the database. And if you learned the distribution of the data, then you basically know where in the latent space you need to sample to get the optimal property. And so by sampling these regions intensively, you basically have a better chance of finding a novel material with the target property. And one of the first sort of works to use variational autoencoders in chemical science is the work by Alan. And in this work, they encoded the molecular structures into the strings format, SMILES strings, and they encode the SMILES information into the latent space, map that into the latent space. So basically, each point in this vector space represents a molecule. And along the training of this autoencoder, you can add a separate property prediction model. And if you by adding this property prediction model, you can basically restructure the latent space. And so you can see that these red regions and yellow regions, they all correspond to sort of different property regions. And so once you know such sort of a property embedded latent space, then you know where to sample. And you can even do the sort of some kind of optimization by using the gradients of the property. And so in this work that Gianmarco kindly mentioned, we basically extended this variational autoencoder work to the solid state materials cases. But the first bottleneck was to realize what would be the representation of the proper way of representing the solid state structures. And we used images. And so we represent the unit cells using images, and we construct the variational autoencoders. And this is the two-dimensional projection of the latent space. And because we included the stability prediction model along the training, you can see that this latent space is restructured according to the stability or the formation energies of the material. So this is corresponding to the stable materials, and this is corresponding to the unstable region for the vanadium oxide compound space. And so by sort of sampling in this stable region, we were able to find some novel structures. So on the lower left corner, do you see this formation as a function of vanadium composition, and these blue circles are the structures that are already in the Materials project database, and these orange circles are the structures that are newly generated out of our generative model. And you can see that these compositions correspond to completely new compositions, and some of those structures are very close or quite reasonably close to the convexal minimum, suggesting that they might be synthesizable, at least thermodynamically. And we then extended this model and explored the ternary compound space instead of binary. And in this case, we also used GAN, to be precise, WGAN, instead of a variational autoencoder. And on the left-hand side, I'm showing you the phase diagram of magnesium mangan oxide ternary compound space. And these red circles are the existing materials in the Materials project database. On the right-hand side, I'm plotting the same phase diagram, except that I added these red circles are corresponding to the structures generated from our GAN model. And you can clearly see that by using GAN, you can basically fill up the hidden portion of the chemical space between the known structures. So basically by using GAN, you can explore the hidden chemical space, hopefully efficiently. And because we chose this system, because this is some compositions of this compound space are already known to be active as photoanode material, we then examined whether some of these structures might be promising as photoanode applications. And indeed, we find that some of the structures have reasonably good proof-based stability and band gaps, so that they might be testable experimentally as a promising photoanode application material. Okay, so in the remaining 5 or 7 minutes or so, let me talk about synthesizability. So like I said, many of these structures or materials that are computationally designed, either using property prediction models or generative models or high-throughput screening, many of them end up being discarded because they are not synthesized. So it'd be good to have a model that can predict the synthesizability. However, such a classification model it differs from the conventional classification, because in conventional classification, you have a positive data and negative data. And by training the model, if you have an unknown data, then by using that as an input, the model will be able to tell you whether the unknown data will be positive or negative. But in the synthesizability prediction task, you only have the positive data and no negative data, because if the material has been synthesized, it's already a positive data. But if it's not synthesized yet, then that doesn't mean that it is unsynthesizable, because it may be synthesized later on. So basically, you only have the positive data and unlabeled data. So for that, we use this kind of iterative positive unlabeled learning technique. And I can answer the question if there are questions technically at the end of my talk. So I'll just show the results. So we trained the model with the materials project, where we have about 50,000 positive data with the ICSD tag, and about 80,000 hypothetical data, which are basically obtained by the substitution of the existing materials. And our model has a prediction accuracy, recall accuracy, positivity recall accuracy is about 87%. To validate our model, we basically only used the synthesized data up to year 2015, and then determined whether that model is able to predict the synthesizability of those materials that are synthesized between 2016 and 2020. And we again obtained about 86 to 87% accuracy. And one thing that we found interesting was this figure. It compares the synthesizability score on the x-axis, 1 being highly synthesizable, 0 being highly unsynthesizable, and y-axis is the thermodynamic stability. And we find that synthesizability and thermodynamics is not correlated. I mean, so including us, we usually use formation energies or energy of a hole as a rough estimate of the synthesizability of inorganic crystal structures. But this suggests that that may not be true. And so there might be something more than thermodynamics for predicting synthesizability. And on the right lower corner, I'm showing the synthesizability of hypothetical materials of the various databases. And MP database, virtual, hypothetical data, about 20% of them are synthesizable according to our model. And OQMD, in the OQMD case, about 10% is synthesizable. And that means that even if there are many hypothetical materials in those databases, we may not really need to explore all of those for our applications when you perform some kind of high-throughput filter screen, because even if they are selected as promising, they may not be synthesizable. So if our model is reliable enough, that would save a lot of time and cost. To further validate our model, we out of this 80,000 hypothetical data, we ranked them according to the synthesizability score and explored whether any of top 100 hypothetical materials have been synthesized in literature. We find that about 70% of them have been indeed synthesized. And this is the case where they have been synthesized and they have been reported in literature, but they have not been deposited in the database yet. So this sort of shows that the validity of the model is very reasonable, and so this could be taken as another validation. And for experimentalists, it'd be good to have a model that can predict the synthesizability based only on the composition, because often cases you don't know the structure ahead of experimental synthesis. So it'd be good to have a model that can predict the synthesizability only based on the chemical composition, AX, BY, and that kind of thing. And we find we have about 94 to 95% of accuracy, even higher accuracy. And now, since we have the synthesizability prediction models for structure-based and composition-based, we can compare them. And we found an interesting sort of a relationship between the two. So these diagonal parts are the parts where both predictions are mutually consistent. But these off-diagonal parts are parts that where both predictions are mutually inconsistent. In other words, this is the case where structure-based synthesizability model predicts that they may not be synthesizable, but composition-based model predicts them to be synthesizable. So that means that because given composition, there may be different kinds of structures, namely polymorphs. So this sort of 40% of this region strongly indicates that many of the compositions in the materials project may be polymorphs. They have not been found yet, but they may be synthesizable. So we are exploring along the line, and we apply that to this tonal compound space, barium, vanadium, oxygen space, and these stars are the materials that are already synthesized and reported, and we overlaid these results on top of our color-coded synthesizability map. And these blue regions are the highly synthesizable region, and the red regions highly unsynthesizable region. And you can clearly see that all those structures that have been synthesized lie in the synthesizable region, according to our model. And because our model, this positive unlabeled learning, is ensemble-based method, you can even estimate the uncertainty of the predictions. And luckily, all those structures that have been synthesized lie in the sort of a certain region, certain prediction regions. Okay, so let me see. So these are, so far I've been talking about this inorganic sort of materials informatics, but for organic sort of molecular science, instead of a synthesizability, a more proper or relevant question might be synthesis pathway planning. And so we've been working on the prediction of a synthesis pathways for organic molecules. And so, for example, on the right-hand side, you can see that for a USPTO patent data set, there are about 500,000 chemical reactions, and we can derive about 20,000 local reaction templates. By local reaction template, I mean remove all the parts that are same between the reactant and the product, and then you only look at the changes of the reactions between the reactant and product. And this is one kind of reaction template, and you can derive about 20,000 of them by looking at these 500,000 reaction databases. And then you can train the model in short, such that the model predicts the conditional probability of each atom or bonds going through different kinds of reaction template. And so the sort of the dimension of this prediction vector would be 20,000 times number of atoms and number of bonds. And so you have this ranking system, and then scores give you sort of the reactions with different priority. And we get about 85 to 92 top 5 accuracy. This means that about 90% of the time, the correct reaction pathway will be within the rank 5 predictions. And for example, this is sort of a compound.
Sorry, Yousung, but it would be nice if you could slowly wrap up in such a way that there can be some questions to your talk.
Yeah, so thank you. This is actually in my last slide. So you can apply the same this retrosynthesis model and predict the reaction pathways applying the method. Okay, so I've talked about three different aspects: property predictions, and then exploring the chemical space, and the synthesizer predictions, all using machine learning. And these are the 5 students that worked on all the things that I presented today. And I would like to thank my collaborators, Alan, John, Zach, Bill, Tao, and Xiangping, and thank you for your attention. And I'm sorry for taking longer time. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for this beautiful talk. My question was about the experimental verification methods that you have. If you talk about the chemical reaction methods of, for instance, your platinum structure. So is there any way to validate the reactivity as you modeled it versus experiments? For instance, on single crystal surfaces, or is there any way to validate these reactivities?
Right. So eventually, the most important task is the experimental validation. So that's a very good point. And for platinum, Jagged platinum case, there is already an experiment that shows that these jagged platinum nanowires exhibits much enhanced activity towards hydrogen evolution reaction and oxygen reduction reactions, and our model confirms that. So that can be seen as a confirmation. And for other binding energy predictions, you are very right that one has to synthesize those alloys and demonstrate those computationally designed alloys would have the properties that are as predicted. And there are cases where these machine learning predicted properties are experimentally validated, but for our case, we have not. So the very first subject that I mentioned, using these mean field descriptors, we identified several alloys that might be more active for CO2 reduction to CO. They have not been synthesized yet, and so there was no experimental confirmation for that part. And so they might be the case where the synthesizability may also be important as well.
Maybe you can take the question by Hongbin Zhang.
Yes, I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much for this very nice talk. We have been very much inspired by this crystal representation you kind of designed for inverse design. But a specific question from my side would be about the evaluation of the formation energy or the convex Hall for the oxides. So I think, like from the literature, it is well known that we have to do some corrections to the formation energy convex halls. So then how did you get this done for the vanadium oxide and magnesium oxide?
So yes, so that is related to the use of U corrections and the functionals and other technical details. And so I don't remember all the details, and maybe it might be too lengthy to discuss. And so I would like to refer you to the supporting information about paper. But like you said, these spin states and then the root corrections, they need to be carefully checked and validated against the known experimental data and also other theoretical calculations in the literature. So we've done that. And we can email exchange if you need further clarifications. I would be very happy to answer the questions.
Thank you. That is appreciated.
Thank you.
We have a question here.
So it's also about the inverse design part. So I guess that the algorithms you used require a lot of data, and concerning the vanadium oxides, I think the actual amount is quite limited. Did you use any technique to augment the number of data points?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, generative model is very data intensive, so you need a lot of data to train in the first place. And we did not augment the data in the first version of the paper. So by augmentation, I don't know what you mean by augmentation, but if you define it to be sort of data that are obtained by the substitution of the materials with other elements, then we did the augmentation. But if you define the augmentation by rotations and translations, and you can generate all sorts of maybe 100 structures for the same unicell, then we did not do that augmentation. Okay. So maybe referring to the first aspect. So there are about 100 vanadium oxide compounds in the Materials project database, and 100 of them is far not sufficient. So we augmented those vanadium oxide compounds by substitutions of the existing materials, and eventually we had about 10,000 or 20,000 structures for training. Was that your question?
Yeah, thank you.